You know, it is, it's a profoundly strange experience when you actually stop and think about a modern grocery store.
Oh, absolutely.
Like you walk through those automatic sliding doors and you are immediately surrounded by, I mean, tens of thousands of highly specific items.
Right.
You have avocados that were growing on a tree in Mexico like 48 hours ago. You have running shoes engineered with synthetic polymers that took decades to develop.
Yeah, and smartphones sitting in a glass case with more computing power than, the entire Apollo space program.
Exactly. And all of it is just sitting there, neatly arranged, with highly specific, seemingly arbitrary numbers attached to them, price tags.
It's wild when you frame it
And
that way.
it looks like magic. It really does. It looks like this perfectly orchestrated, frictionless, almost inevitable system.
It does, yeah.
Yeah.
It feels entirely automatic. I mean, we are conditioned to look at a shelf, see a loaf of bread for a few dollars, and just assume the universe decided that's what bread costs, and that it should naturally just, manifest on that shelf precisely when you happen to want it.
It's incredibly comforting to think that way. We like to imagine that the world of money and prices and supply chains is just this solid mechanical infrastructure like plumbing.
Yeah, you just turn the tap and the water comes out.
Exactly. But then you start peering under the hood, looking at how all of those things actually got there and why they cost exactly what they do, and suddenly the illusion shatters.
Completely shatters.
You realize it is not a preordained machine at all. It is a massive, chaotic, incredibly fragile web of human behavior. We are looking at a landscape built entirely on millions and millions of invisible trade-offs.
Which is the absolute definition of a hidden calculator running in the background of human existence.
Yes.
It is processing data and desires and limitations 24 hours a day, and most of us never even realize we are actively inputting the data.
Well, today we are going to expose that calculator. Welcome to today's Deep Dive.
So glad to be here.
Our mission for you today is incredibly ambitious, but I promise it is going to fundamentally change how you view every single decision made around you. We are going straight to the bedrock of how the world works.
The very foundation.
We are tackling the entirety of microeconomics, and we are drawing from some of the most foundational frameworks available, specifically examining the core principles laid out in the Cambridge IGCSE economics frameworks.
Which is honestly the perfect lens for us today. Because when you strip away the high-level financial jargon and the complex mathematical modeling, you're forced to look at the absolute core principles.
Right.
You realize very quickly that economics is not really the study of money.
It's the study of choices.
Exactly. It is the study of human choices under pressure.
Let's unpack that pressure, because I think that is where this entire deep dive has to begin. Before we can even start to understand how global markets function or how a multinational corporation sets a price on a new laptop, we have to understand the tension that forces them to make those choices in the first place.
Yes, the fundamental catalyst.
The literature starts us off with a very harsh reality check. The ultimate constraint.
And that constraint is reality itself. I mean, the foundational models of economics always start with what is termed the basic economic problem.
Right.
It's the central engine of human struggle, and it boils down to a very simple, somewhat tragic reality. Limited resources crashing headfirst into unlimited wants.
Limited resources, unlimited wants. Let's really look at the mechanics of that, because it sounds like a bumper sticker, but it is actually a profound observation of the human condition.
It really is.
Like, the Earth only has so much arable land. There are only so many raw materials we can pull out of the crust. There are only 24 hours in a day, and there's a finite number of people able to do the work.
Right. That is the limited resources part. It's a closed system.
The human desire. The literature is explicit that our wants are infinite.
That is the crux of the issue. If human wants were limited, like if society collectively reached a point where everyone was perfectly content with a bowl of rice, a single set of clothes, and a modest shelter, the entire discipline of economics would cease to exist.
Wait, really? Just vanish.
Literally vanish. Because there would be no scarcity. Our demands would easily fit within the planet's capacity to provide. But our desires infinitely outpace the physical capacity of our reality.
Right. We always want better healthcare, faster transport, more durable housing, novel entertainment.
Exactly. We always want more.
So because that infinite desire is trapped inside a finite reality, we get scarcity. And scarcity acts as a sort of evolutionary pressure. It forces every single entity, from you deciding what to eat for lunch to a global superpower, to do one thing: choose.
Which brings us to a concept that is arguably the most crucial mental model you can possibly adopt: Opportunity cost.
If you take one single thing away from this deep dive, let it be this. Because I'll admit, before really digging into these economic frameworks, I casually use the word cost to mean the literal price tag on an item.
Oh, most people do. It's totally normal.
Right, like if a coffee is $4, the cost is $4. But the economic definition of opportunity cost is much more aggressive. It is defined strictly as the cost of the next best opportunity foregone when making a decision.
The word foregone is the key to the whole mechanism there. Opportunity cost forces you to realize that every time you say yes to something, you are simultaneously, unavoidably saying no to something else.
Right.
The true cost of your choice is not the currency you handed over. The true cost is the exact experience, the exact potential that you had to sacrifice.
Let's ground this because the source material provides some micro-level examples that illustrate just how deeply this penetrates everyday life. Take a student making a seemingly simple choice about their education.
Okay, classic example.
Let's say they decide to dedicate their semester to studying economics.
On paper, the cost might look like the price of the textbooks or the tuition, but the opportunity cost is the other subject they could have mastered instead.
Right, because they only have so many hours.
Exactly. The student only has a finite number of cognitive hours in a day. By allocating those hours to economics, they are inherently deciding that they will not gain the knowledge of history or the spatial understanding of geography that they would have acquired in that exact same time slot.
Wow.
So the cost to their economics literacy is their historical ignorance.
It is a zero-sum game with your own time. Here is another example from the frameworks that I think everyone can relate to. Imagine it is a Saturday night, you have a few hours of free time, you decide to go to the cinema to see a new release.
Sure.
The standard way of thinking is, well, the cost of this evening is the $15 ticket and the popcorn.
But the economic model demands you look at the alternative. The literature points out that the opportunity cost is the money you would have earned from, say, babysitting for your neighbor or picking up a freelance shift instead of going to the cinema.
It is the lost income.
Right. You didn't just spend $15. You sacrificed the $40 you could have generated. So the economic reality is that the movie cost you $55 of net worth.
Okay, let me push back a little here, or rather try to refine the analogy. Because what if money isn't the alternative?
What do you mean?
Say, I'm already at home. I decide to spend an hour watching a movie on a streaming service instead of reading a dense nonfiction book I already own. The opportunity cost isn't my monthly streaming subscription fee, right?
No, you've already paid that.
Right, I've already paid that as a sunk cost. And it's not lost wages because I wasn't going to work anyway. So is the opportunity cost purely the intellectual growth I didn't get from that book?
That is a brilliant distinction, yes. In that scenario, your scarce resource is time and cognitive bandwidth.
Right.
You allocated 1 hour to passive entertainment. The next best alternative, your foregone opportunity, was the knowledge contained in the book.
Mm-hmm.
You paid for that movie with your own unacquired intelligence.
That is slightly terrifying when you frame it that way. Every single action is purchased with a ghost of an alternative action.
It really is.
And this doesn't just apply to individuals. It scales up massively. The sources talk about a local school deciding to buy 100 new laptops for their classrooms.
A very common scenario.
The opportunity cost isn't the budget line item. It's the microscopes and chemistry sets they can no longer afford to buy. The cost of digital literacy for those students is a direct reduction in their practical scientific experience.
Or look at the decision to pursue higher education, like a student going to university to study for a degree for 4 years. Society often frames the cost of university purely around the anxiety of tuition fees and student loans.
Right, we obsess over the $50,000 a year in tuition.
But the economic framework forces you to add the massive loss in income that would have been earned if that student had chosen to enter the workforce full-time, straight out of high school.
Oh, wow.
If they could have earned $35,000 a year over 4 years, that is $140,000 of foregone income. The opportunity cost of a university degree is the tuition, plus that lost salary, plus the 4 years of compounded professional experience they didn't get.
That's huge.
You are paying an astronomical premium in invisible capital.
When you calculate the invisible capital, every decision feels infinitely heavier. But where this concept truly blew my mind is when the source material zooms all the way out. We leave the individual, we leave the school, and we look at the macro level of a sovereign nation. The literature highlights the United States federal government budget from 2017.
This is where opportunity cost stops being a personal philosophical exercise
There.
and becomes the mechanism that dictates the fate of millions.
Exactly.
A government, even one as wealthy as the United States, only raises a finite amount of taxation revenue. It's a colossal number, but it is strictly finite.
And the source notes the 2017 budget included spending hundreds of billions of dollars across various sectors, and the percentage breakdown they provide is fascinating as a snapshot of national priorities.
Let's hear it.
In that budget, 42.2% was allocated to labor and social affairs, 11.1% on national defense, 8.2% on transport and digital infrastructure.
Okay, pretty massive chunks.
Yeah, and then 6.1% on federal debts, 5.3% on education and research, and 4.6% on healthcare.
Now, apply our mental model of opportunity cost to that pie chart. In political discourse, spending is often treated in a vacuum. Like a politician will say, we need to increase national defense spending to ensure security.
Right, happens all the time.
Let's say they want to increase that 11.1% to 15%.
But because it's a closed system, that money literally has to be carved out of another sector.
Precisely. You cannot summon resources from the ether. If defense goes up by 4%, something else must come down by 4%. An increase in defense spending might mean a direct dollar-for-dollar decrease in that 5.3% allocated for education and research.
So the opportunity cost of purchasing a fleet of new fighter jets or a nuclear submarine is not the billions of dollars on the invoice.
No, not at all.
The opportunity cost is the cancer research grants that were denied funding that year. It is the dilapidated bridges that weren't repaired in the transport budget. The cost of the submarine might literally be a delay in a medical breakthrough.
It reveals how brutal resource allocation truly is at scale. The government is constantly deciding which subset of its population will bear the invisible cost of its priorities.
Man.
When you look at that 2017 budget, it proves that even the most powerful entities on Earth cannot escape the basic economic problem. The United States government has limited resources and unlimited societal wants.
The sources even use a highly specific example to drive this home regarding public infrastructure. If a government decides to build a brand new, state-of-the-art airport terminal to boost international trade, the opportunity cost of that exact pool of funding and construction labor might be the public housing for low-income families that is now delayed by a decade.
And this is where economics intersects with ethics. Even though economics itself is amoral, the framework just lays out the math.
Right, it doesn't judge.
Exactly. It asks which yields the greater social benefit, the economic stimulus of the airport or the stabilization of vulnerable families through housing. Economics refuses to make the moral choice for you. It just ruthlessly forces you to acknowledge that the choice exists and that you cannot have both.
So if every single choice, from buying a coffee to building an aircraft carrier, carries this invisible shadow of a cost, the natural question becomes, how do you even begin to measure or study that at scale?
Well, you can't. Not all at once.
Right, if you try to look at the whole economy at once, it's just noise. Millions of people making billions of trade-offs every second. To actually see the machinery working, you have to adjust the resolution of your lens. You have to zoom in and you have to zoom out.
Which introduces the fundamental divide in how we analyze these systems, the split between microeconomics and macroeconomics.
Because our primary mission today is decoding the micro side, let's establish exactly where that boundary lies. The literature defines microeconomics as the study of particular markets and sections of the economy, rather than the economy as a whole.
We are looking at the specific trees, not the forest.
Exactly. We are analyzing the behavior of individual decision makers, the atoms of the economy. We are looking at specific households and specific firms.
And the topics that fall under this micro umbrella are incredibly targeted. We're talking about the factors of production land, labor, capital.
Right.
We're looking at the elasticity of demand, how a firm calculates its costs, how they set their objectives, the structure of a specific market, and where that specific market fails.
To put it in practical terms, microeconomics is asking, why did this particular entrepreneur decide to take the risk of starting a bakery on this specific street?
Or, as the sources suggest, looking at a single farmer making a tactical decision about their finite acreage. How do they allocate their land between growing crops versus dedicating space to rearing farm animals?
That is a hyper-local microeconomic decision driven by the specific prices of wheat versus the specific price of beef.
Exactly.
It is also rival firms hiring analysts to investigate each other's pricing strategies so they can undercut them.
It is entirely focused on the mechanics of individual markets. But of course, the other side of the lens is macroeconomics.
Which the frameworks define as the study of economic behavior and decision-making in the whole economy.
This is where we pull the camera all the way up to orbit. We are no longer looking at the farmer or the bakery. We're looking at aggregate variables, the sum total of all activity.
So, macroeconomic topics are the massive systemic weather patterns, economic growth of a nation, the total employment or unemployment rate, the general rise of inflation, and the vast mechanisms of income redistribution.
The friction between the two is fascinating because macro outcomes are entirely emergent from micro decisions.
How so?
Well, if a single bakery realizes that the cost of flour has doubled and they have to lay off 2 workers to stay afloat, that is a microeconomic event.
Right, local scale.
But if 50,000 bakeries, factories, and tech firms all make that exact same micro decision on the same day, you suddenly have a macroeconomic unemployment crisis. The micromechanism scales up to create the macro weather.
And it is vital to know which lens you are looking through because the solutions are completely different. You can't solve a macroeconomic inflation crisis by analyzing the business plan of one bakery. You have to understand the aggregate.
Precisely.
But let me test this boundary because sometimes the lines feel a bit blurry. Let's play a game based on the sourced workbook. It categorizes the study of labor markets as microeconomics. Now, labor involves hundreds of millions of people. How is that micro?
It is a common point of confusion. It feels macro because the sheer volume of humans involved is massive. But it remains microeconomics because a labor market is still a specific isolated market.
Oh, I see.
We don't just have one giant pool of labor. We have the market for specialized neurosurgeons, and we have the entirely separate market for entry-level retail cashiers.
So because the neurosurgeon isn't competing for the cashier's job, they are distinct ecosystems.
Exactly. Microeconomics studies the demand for specific skills by specific firms and the supply of workers who possess those skills. It's highly segmented.
Okay, that makes sense.
In contrast, if we were studying inflation, the general devaluation of the currency across all markets simultaneously, that is an aggregate variable. That is macro.
Okay, that clarifies the resolution we are working at today. We are staying zoomed in. We are operating in the micro realm.
Yes, deep in the weeds.
And since we are looking at specific ecosystems, we need to identify the apex predators and the grazers. We need to look at the actual players on the field making these choices under the pressure of scarcity. The literature refers to them as the economic agents.
There are 3 primary agents in any economic system, and every single one of them is trying to solve the exact same problem, just from different angles.
First, we have individuals or households, that is the consumer base, you, me, families, anyone who buys groceries or pays rent.
Right.
Second, we have firms. These are the private businesses, ranging from a local plumber to a multinational tech conglomerate.
And the third agent is the government, which operates the public sector.
Now, here is where the mechanics get incredibly interesting. The frameworks dictate that regardless of whether you are a single person, a massive private firm, or a sovereign government, the reality of scarce resources forces you to answer 3 fundamental questions.
This is the core operating system.
1, what to produce. 2, how to produce it. And 3, for whom to produce it.
Those 3 questions form the operating system of civilization. How a society answers them determines everything about its culture, its wealth, and its inequality.
Wow.
And the answers depend entirely on which sector is making the decision, because the private sector and the public sector have fundamentally opposing motives.
Let's draw that line in the sand, because the sources are very explicit about this dichotomy. The private sector consists of individuals and firms, and their prime directive, their singular aim, it is to earn profit for their owners. That is the engine.
It is unapologetic. The private sector does not exist to be benevolent. It exists to generate a return on investment.
Right.
Contrast that with the public sector, the government. Their theoretical aim is entirely different. It is to provide a service. The literature highlights state education and healthcare as prime examples of public sector activity designed for societal benefit, not financial profit.
To really see how this profit motive rewires decision-making, let's walk through a highly specific hypothetical provided in the source materials. Let's look at a private firm trying to enter the market by producing running shoes.
It's a perfect case study.
We can watch them answer those 3 basic questions in real time.
So our hypothetical private firm is sitting on a pile of capital. They face question one: what to produce?
They could produce anything: water filters, textbooks, medical equipment. But they analyze the market and decide running shoes.
Why?
Because the market research indicates a massive margin. They believe they can manufacture these shoes for $20 and sell them for $150.
Right, the profit motive is the only reason the shoes will exist.
Exactly. If running shoes suddenly became unprofitable to manufacture, this firm would instantly pivot to producing something else. The what is dictated by the margin.
Exactly. Once they've established the what, they hit question two: how to produce it.
This is where strategy comes in. Do they hire highly skilled, expensive local artisans to hand-stitch premium leather? Or do they offshore the production to a massive facility using automated machinery and cheaper labor?
Because they are in the private sector, their goal is to maximize the gap between their costs and their revenue. They will rigorously optimize the how to minimize their expenses.
Right.
If a machine can do the job of 10 workers for half the price, the profit motive dictates they buy the machine.
And finally, they arrive at the third and perhaps most revealing question: for whom to produce it?
This is where the private sector can seem ruthless.
Yeah.
They are not making these running shoes for everyone who needs footwear.
Yeah.
They are entirely ignoring the segment of the population that cannot afford a $150 shoe.
They might design a hyper-specialized carbon-plated shoe for professional athletes who will pay top dollar, or a trendy aesthetic shoe for affluent casual runners.
Exactly. The for whom is answered exclusively by identifying who has the willingness and the ability to pay their premium.
The profit motive acts as a compass, guiding every micro decision from the factory floor to the marketing campaign. But what is truly illuminating is to run a thought experiment. What happens if we force the public sector to answer those exact same three questions for the exact same product?
Let's do it. Imagine the government decides that adequate footwear is a fundamental right, and they step in to manufacture running shoes. How does the service motive change the answers?
The divergence is immediate. Question one: what to produce? A private firm chases high-margin trends. The government, driven by providing a public service, isn't going to produce a neon, carbon-plated racing shoe.
No, definitely not.
They're going to produce a heavily standardized, highly durable, generic utility shoe designed to last 5 years without degrading.
And question two: how to produce it? This completely flips. The private firm automated to eliminate labor costs. But a government might intentionally choose a slightly less efficient, more labor-intensive manufacturing process.
Wait, really? Why?
Because as a public entity, part of their service mandate might be job creation. They might deliberately employ 5,000 local workers to make the shoes, accepting a higher production cost, because reducing local unemployment is part of their broader social objective.
That makes total sense. And the third question, for whom to produce it, undergoes the most drastic transformation.
Absolutely.
The government doesn't target the affluent runner. They distribute the shoes based on need. They might provide them for free to low-income students or subsidize them heavily for the elderly. They are producing for the exact demographic that the private sector completely ignored.
It's a complete inversion of the operating system. It perfectly highlights how the underlying objective, profit versus service, completely dictates the physical reality of the goods in our world.
And this brings the concept right back to the individual level. Every single time you participate in the economy, every time you buy a coffee or subscribe to a software platform, you are an active agent in this matrix.
You're casting a vote.
By handing over your money, you are actively helping that private firm answer the for whom to produce question. You are sending a localized signal that says, yes, your choice of what and how to produce was correct. Keep doing it.
Which is the perfect bridge to the most mind-bending part of this entire deep dive.
Oh, yeah.
We've established that the private sector uses this aggressive profit motive to answer the big questions. But wait, how on earth do they actually coordinate all of this? Think about the scale.
It's massive.
There are millions of independent consumers. There are thousands of competing firms. There is no central authority, no grand dictator sitting in an office telling the shoe company to make 10,000 size 8s and 5,000 size 10s.
It sounds like a recipe for absolute anarchy.
It really does.
And yet, when you walk into the grocery store, the shelves are stocked. The exact amount of milk that the town wants to buy today is sitting in the fridge. How is this possible without a central planner?
This is where we encounter the ultimate economic calculator, the decentralized engine of microeconomics. It is known as the price mechanism.
The literature defines the price mechanism, or the market system, as the system of relying on the market forces of demand and supply to allocate resources.
And we must emphasize the critical feature of this system as outlined in the frameworks. There is no government interference.
Zero.
The price mechanism operates in a pure free market vacuum. Resources are owned by private economic agents, and they have the absolute freedom to allocate them based entirely on financial incentives.
Let's pull this engine apart and look at the pistons. It runs on two massive forces, demand and supply. Now, everyone casually uses the word demand. We say there's a lot of demand for that new video game.
Right.
But the economic definition of demand is razor sharp and honestly a bit brutal.
It is vital to understand this distinction. The frameworks define demand as referring to both the willingness and the ability of customers to pay a given price to buy a good or service.
Willingness and ability.
Yes. The literature even uses the term effective demand to aggressively separate it from mere human desire.
Let's really analyze what that means. If I walk past a luxury car dealership and I look at a $200,000 sports car and I deeply, passionately want it, I have an intense human desire for that vehicle, but I only have $50 in my checking account.
Okay, classic scenario.
Under the rules of the price mechanism, do I have any impact on the demand for that car?
Zero. You are mathematically invisible to the market. The price mechanism does not factor in human yearning. It only registers data points backed by capital.
Wow.
If you lack the ability to pay, you do not possess effective demand, and therefore the market will not allocate resources to satisfy your desire.
Oh, wait, I want to challenge this idea of effective demand being this perfect, frictionless allocator of resources. Because if demand absolutely requires the ability to pay, isn't the price mechanism just a highly efficient machine for structurally ignoring the poor?
It's a heavy question.
For example, if we look at the pharmaceutical market, you might have millions of people in poverty who desperately desire a life-saving medication. Their need is absolute. But because they lack the ability to pay a high price, they have no effective demand.
Correct.
So the market calculates that the efficient allocation of resources is to produce high-margin baldness treatments for wealthy executives rather than malaria drugs for the destitute. Isn't that a catastrophic flaw in the engine?
That is exactly the central critique of pure free market capitalism.
Yeah.
And it is a fundamental truth of how the price mechanism operates. The system is amoral.
Amoral.
It is highly, almost ruthlessly efficient at allocating resources based on financial incentives, but it is completely structurally blind to human suffering, morality, or need if there is no currency attached to it.
Yeah.
The market does not serve humanity, it serves effective demand.
It is a sobering realization, but if we accept that brutal premise, how does the engine actually self-regulate? Goods are allocated purely on the basis of price. So if a price is high, it acts as a flare in the night sky to producers that says, there is profit here.
So suppliers rush to produce more.
Simultaneously, that high price acts as a deterrent to consumers. It says, conserve your resources.
And when these two forces, the consumers looking for a deal and the producers looking for profit, collide, they push the market toward what the frameworks call market equilibrium.
Equilibrium is a state of theoretical perfection. It exists when the demand for a product perfectly, exactly matches the supply at a specific price point. There is no excess demand, which would mean a shortage, and there is no excess supply, which would mean a surplus.
The exact number of shoes produced is the exact number of shoes purchased.
It's like a perfectly balanced scale.
Right.
But reality is messy. The market is constantly in a state of flux. The sources discuss market disequilibrium, which is when the engine gets out of sync. What happens when a firm makes a massive miscalculation and sets a price too high?
They create a surplus. Let's go back to our shoe company. They thought they could sell their shoes for $200. But consumers look at that price, and their effective demand drops. The company produces 10,000 shoes, but only sells 2,000. They have 8,000 shoes sitting in a warehouse, costing them money in storage fees.
So, without any government stepping in to tell them what to do, the price mechanism corrects itself. The firm realizes they are bleeding money. They announce a massive sale. They drop the price to $100 to clear the inventory.
Exactly.
By lowering the price, they decrease their profit margin, but they artificially stimulate effective demand, pushing the market forcefully back toward equilibrium.
Conversely, what if they set the price too low? Say they launch a revolutionary new shoe for $50. The effective demand is astronomical.
Everyone wants one, you get a shortage.
Right. The firm produces 10,000 shoes, but 50,000 people try to buy them. The shelves are empty on day one.
And again, the market signal flashes. The firm realizes they left money on the table. They realize consumers are willing to pay significantly more. So for the next production run, they raise the price to $120.
And that higher price incentivizes them to increase production, while simultaneously pricing out some of the consumers, naturally curbing the demand until the two forces meet perfectly in the middle. Equilibrium is restored.
It is a stunningly elegant, self-correcting information network. Prices aren't just numbers, they are highly condensed signals communicating millions of variables about scarcity, labor, and desire.
They really are.
And the frameworks point out another massive benefit to this system: competition. Because firms are chasing that equilibrium and that profit, they are heavily incentivized to innovate, to improve quality, and to optimize their efficiency to beat their rivals.
However, not everyone playing this game has the same advantages. The literature makes a very important distinction between the types of firms operating in this engine. They distinguish between price takers and price makers.
This dictates how much power an agent actually has over the calculator. A price taker is a firm that is entirely at the mercy of the market equilibrium. They have zero power to change the price.
Imagine a single independent farmer selling generic corn. They take their harvest to the global market. They cannot suddenly demand double the market price for their corn because their product is identical to thousands of other farmers.
Right, buyers would just go elsewhere.
Exactly. If they raise their price by even a fraction, the buyers will instantly abandon them and buy from the farmer next door.
Yeah.
They must take whatever price the market dictates.
On the other end of the spectrum, you have price makers. These are firms that have accumulated enough market power, brand loyalty, or exclusive technology that they can actually dictate their own prices, rather than just passively accepting the equilibrium.
Apple is a classic price maker. They don't look at the generic equilibrium price of a mobile phone. They set their price, and the market adjusts to them.
So we have this incredibly powerful, self-regulating engine. But as we discussed earlier with the pharmaceutical example, sometimes this engine produces outcomes that are socially catastrophic.
Yeah.
The literature recognizes this. It even provides a specific mechanism for what happens when society refuses to accept the market equilibrium. In the glossary, it details the concept of a maximum price.
A maximum price is a deliberate act of sabotage against the price mechanism. It occurs when a government steps in and legally sets a price cap below the natural market equilibrium in order to encourage consumption of a necessity.
Think about rent control in a major city, or a government capping the price of basic bread or heating oil during a crisis. The free market equilibrium price might be so high that working-class people face homelessness or starvation.
The market is functioning efficiently according to its own math, but the human cost is unacceptable.
Exactly. So the government interferes. They throw a wrench into the gears and say you cannot charge more than this specific amount.
But you cannot cheat the fundamental laws of economics. When the government artificially suppresses the price below equilibrium, they instantly create a massive disequilibrium.
They create a permanent shortage.
Exactly. Because at that artificially low price, effective demand skyrockets. Everyone wants a cheap apartment. But from the supply side, the producers, the landlords, or the bakers see their profit margins destroyed.
So they just stop producing.
Right. Their financial incentive vanishes.
Right.
Landlords stop building new apartments or let current ones fall into disrepair. The demand surges, the supply shrinks, and you are left with massive waiting lists and a systemic shortage.
It is a tragic paradox. When you leave the price mechanism alone, it is brutally efficient but can ignore human suffering. But when you actively interfere with it to help people afford necessities, you disrupt the very incentive structure that creates the supply in the first place, often hurting the exact people you were trying to protect.
Which leads us to the inevitable conclusion that the engine is not infallible.
Not at all. And this brings us to the final and frankly most critical segment of our deep dive. We've marveled at the price mechanism. But what happens when the calculator fundamentally miscalculates?
It happens more often than we think.
What happens when the free market, left entirely to its own devices without government caps, creates absolute cascading disasters for society?
In the economic literature, this is formally diagnosed as market failure.
The frameworks define market failure very specifically. It occurs when the market forces of demand and supply fail to allocate resources efficiently, specifically because the production or consumption of a good causes additional positive or negative side effects to a third party who is not involved in the economic activity.
That concept of the third party is the key to unraveling market failure. The entire premise of the price mechanism assumes a closed loop between two consenting agents, the buyer and the seller.
Right.
The calculator assumes that all the costs and all the benefits of a transaction are perfectly contained within that relationship.
But the real world is not a closed loop. The economic models break down the costs involved here, and it is a vital framework for understanding modern problems. First, you have what are called private costs.
Private costs are the tangible, financial costs of production and consumption borne directly by the firm or the individual involved in the transaction.
Let's go back to our shoe factory. The private costs of producing 1,000 pairs of shoes are easily quantifiable. It is the cost of the rubber, the leather, the electricity to run the machines, and the wages paid to the workers.
That is what the factory calculates when setting their price.
But then you have the shadow economy. You have external costs. The frameworks define these as the negative side effects of production or consumption incurred by third parties for which no compensation is paid.
Let's paint a vivid, unfortunately common picture. Imagine that shoe factory, in an effort to minimize its private costs and maximize profit, decides to dump its toxic chemical runoff directly into the river behind the facility rather than paying for safe disposal.
Under the pure lens of the price mechanism, this transaction is a massive success. The buyer of the shoes is thrilled because the shoes are cheap. The factory owner is thrilled because their profit margin is huge. The buyer and the seller achieved equilibrium.
But what about the town situated 10 miles downstream? The people whose drinking water is now contaminated with industrial solvents.
Exactly.
The fishermen whose livelihoods are destroyed because the fish are dead. They are the third party. They never agreed to buy those shoes. They never saw a dime of the profits. Yet they are paying a massive, devastating external cost for those shoes.
And this leads to the ultimate true calculation, which the free market completely ignores: social costs. The literature defines social costs as the true, complete cost of consumption or production to society as a whole. Mathematically, it is the sum of the private costs plus the external costs.
So when that factory pollutes the river, their private cost on the ledger is incredibly low. But the social cost, the health crisis, the environmental cleanup, the lost fishing revenue is dangerously, ruinously high.
And the terrifying part, the free market does not care, because the price mechanism only has eyes for private costs. It is completely blind to external costs. This is the definition of a catastrophic market failure.
The market is actively incentivizing the destruction of the river because it rewards the factory with higher profits for avoiding disposal fees. The frameworks outline several specific root causes of market failure, and negative externalities like pollution are just one of them. Another major cause is the failure to provide public goods.
The literature states quite bluntly that the private sector will completely fail to provide certain critical goods and services due to a lack of a profit motive.
A classic economic example is a coastal lighthouse or national defense, or, on a local level, streetlights. Why won't a private profit-driven firm build a streetlight system?
It's an interesting question.
It's because of two characteristics: non-excludability and non-rivalry. You cannot easily stop a random pedestrian from enjoying the illumination of a streetlight just because they refuse to pay a subscription fee.
Right, there is no way to put a paywall on the light hitting the pavement.
And if you can't exclude non-payers, you cannot effectively enforce a price. You can't generate a profit. Therefore, even though the entire society desperately needs streetlights to reduce crime and accidents, the private sector will refuse to build them.
So the market fails to provide.
Exactly. The government must step in and use taxation to fund public goods, stepping entirely outside the price mechanism.
The sources also list another fascinating variation of market failure: the underprovision of merit goods, specifically highlighting education and healthcare services. Now, in a purely free, unregulated market, education and healthcare are only provided to those who possess that effective demand, those who are willing and able to pay exorbitant private prices.
But the textbook notes a critical nuance. Society as a whole benefits massively when its population is educated and healthy. It creates positive externalities.
Right.
An educated workforce is more productive, drives innovation, and pays more taxes. The literature explicitly states that improving education helps to alleviate poverty, narrows the gap between the rich and poor, and fundamentally improves the productive capacity of the entire country.
These are massive external benefits to society. If you are a business owner, you benefit from a public school system because you get to hire literate, capable employees even if you didn't personally pay for their schooling.
Exactly.
But the pure free market drastically underprovides education because it only calculates the private transaction between a student and a private tutor. It ignores the societal ripple effect.
So when we look at these failures, the polluted rivers, the missing streetlights, the uneducated populace, we have to confront a harsh reality. Market failure is not just a tiny, occasional glitch in an otherwise perfect system.
Yeah.
It is a fundamental structural feature
Yeah.
of any system where private profit is the sole defining motive.
It is a systemic vulnerability. And there are still more ways it breaks down. The literature outlines another major cause of market failure: the abuse of monopoly power.
We discussed price makers earlier, but what happens when a price maker eliminates all of its rivals? If a firm grows so dominant that it becomes a monopoly, meaning it is the sole provider of a good or service in a market, it wields incredibly dangerous power.
The frameworks explain that a monopoly can exploit this total market power by artificially restricting the supply of their product, which intentionally drives the price sky high. Because consumers have no alternative competitors to turn to, they are forced to pay the extortionate rate.
It's a complete capture of the market.
Furthermore, because the monopoly faces no threat of competition, they lose all incentive to innovate, improve quality, or maintain efficiency. The market fails because it replaces competitive optimization with monopolistic stagnation.
And there is one final cause of market failure, detailed in the foundational text, that is profoundly relevant to our modern, rapidly shifting economy: factor immobility.
This one is deeply fascinating because it deals with the friction of real life. The models often assume things move smoothly, but the text defines factor immobility as occurring when it is difficult for factors of production, like workers or machinery, to move or switch between different uses or geographic locations.
In a pristine theoretical economic model, if consumer demand shifts away from coal power and towards solar energy, the market seamlessly adjusts.
On paper,
A coal mine shuts down, and the exact next day, all of those coal miners smoothly transition into high-paying jobs assembling solar panels, and the capital invested in the mine is instantly redirected to the solar plant.
But the physical reality is riddled with friction. There is occupational and geographical immobility. A 50-year-old coal miner in a rural town might not have the specialized engineering skills to build solar panels. That is occupational immobility.
Right.
And even if they could be trained, they might not have the financial resources or the desire to uproot their entire family and leave their community to move across the country to where the solar jobs are. That is geographical immobility.
The labor factor is sticky, and capital immobility is equally problematic. The literature specifically notes that machinery can be far too expensive or take too much time to update.
Yeah, you can't just repurpose everything.
You cannot simply flip a switch and turn a blast furnace designed for smelting steel into a clean room facility for manufacturing microchips. The capital is trapped in its original purpose.
So how does this cause a market failure? Think about a factory using highly outdated, heavily polluting machinery. The market signals might be telling them to modernize.
But don't.
Because of capital immobility, because new, clean machines cost tens of millions of dollars, the firm calculates that it is cheaper to just keep running the old, dirty machines. The factor immobility traps the economy in an inefficient state, prolonging the generation of negative external costs and keeping the market in a state of persistent failure.
It is all profoundly interconnected. It is a cascading sequence of logic. We started this deep dive with a seemingly simple, almost philosophical equation: unlimited wants colliding with limited resources.
And by following the logic of that single premise, we ended up uncovering this incredibly complex, sometimes breathtakingly efficient, and sometimes deeply flawed machine that dictates the trajectory of our lives.
It really is something.
Let's take a moment to do a high-altitude recap of the massive terrain we've just covered because we have decoded a lot of the matrix today.
We certainly have.
We started by confronting the ultimate reality, the basic economic problem of scarcity. The universe is finite, but our ambition is infinite.
Which forces the concept of opportunity cost upon us. The realization that every single choice you make carries the invisible, heavy shadow of the foregone alternative.
We learned how to adjust our lens. We zoomed in, defining microeconomics as the rigorous study of specific markets, individual decision makers, and isolated mechanisms, contrasting it with the massive aggregate weather systems of macroeconomics.
We identified the key players on the board: households, private firms, driven relentlessly by the profit motive, and the public sector, driven by the mandate of public service. And we saw how differently they answer the core questions of what, how, and for whom to produce.
We marveled at the sheer processing power of the price mechanism, the decentralized engine allocating resources purely based on financial incentives and effective demand, constantly chasing an elusive equilibrium.
And finally, we face the harsh reality check of market failure. The undeniable truth that when external costs are ignored, when public goods are neglected, when monopolies abuse their power, or when labor and capital get stuck, the unregulated free market can create deeply inefficient, damaging outcomes for society as a whole.
It is a staggering amount of hidden architecture to digest, but as we promised at the start, understanding this is the ultimate shortcut to being well-informed about why the world looks the way it does.
Absolutely.
However, before we sign off, I know you have one final, somewhat provocative thought to leave our listener with, something that isn't explicitly solved in the textbook models, but is deeply, urgently tied to everything we've unpacked today.
I do. It builds directly on the framework's definition of social costs and externalities. I want to raise a question for you, the listener, to explore on your own.
All right, let's hear it.
The classic examples of market failure, a factory polluting a local river, assume a somewhat localized world. But we live in an era of unprecedented hyper-globalized connectivity. Supply chains stretch across 5 continents. Digital data is shared instantly across the globe. Atmospheric carbon doesn't respect national borders.
Right.
In a world this deeply intertwined, is there truly such a thing as a strictly private cost anymore? If every single action we take, from the synthetic materials and the running shoes we buy, to the server energy required for the streaming services we use, to the rare earth minerals mined for our smartphones, has a ripple effect that touches an environment or a worker on the other side of the planet. Perhaps the boundary between a private transaction and a global market failure is vanishing entirely.
That is a deeply unsettling yet vital thought. If the external costs are always present on a global scale, then the hidden calculator of the price mechanism is constantly, systemically miscalculating the true cost of our lives.
Exactly.
Thank you for joining us on this massive deep dive. The next time you walk through those automatic doors at the grocery store, or the next time you sit down and negotiate a budget, or even just decide how to spend your Saturday night, I hope you look at your own daily opportunity costs with a completely new, razor-sharp set of eyes.
It changes everything.
Remember, the machine running the world is not magic. It is just a billion overlapping choices, and now you know exactly how to read them.